Hanukkah is coming upon us, and it's time to make latkes. So, before I get started on making the latkes, I want to make a pear and apple spicy, not exactly spicy, but flavorful sauce to go with those latkes. A classic, often made just like an apple sauce, but we're going to make it from scratch and put some interesting flavors in there. So, what I've got done already is I've diced 2 Granny Smith apples and 2 Bosc pears, and I'm going to add to those. I have 1 more apple to dice and 1 more pear to dice to show you how I do that. And then we're going to start to cook that sauce. We want the sauce to be done before we make the latkes. So let's get the sauce done first, then we'll make the latkes. So I'm going to go ahead and peel my apples. You'll see that I have my little bowl of compost and refuse here, so I'm not going into a trash can or onto my cutting board. And I'm using Granny Smith apples because they are the best cooking apple for tartness. And also, before I start peeling the apple, I always have lemon juice ready to go to receive that cut, diced apple because it wants to oxidize very, very quickly. So I'm cutting out the core of the apple. And then I'm going to go ahead and dice. So we're going to cut it pretty small. We would like there to be just a little texture, a little chunk left after the sauce is cooked down. Okay, same thing with the pear. So I'm paring down a pear. Same technique, removing the core. And again, same rule applies. Pears also want to turn brown or oxidize very quickly once they're cut. So it's always good to have lemon juice already squeezed and ready to be in contact with those pears so that they don't oxidize. So I have 3 apples, 3 pears, diced, tossed in lemon juice. And what we're going to do there, I'm going to go ahead and start adding my seasonings and flavorings. I've got 6 cinnamon sticks, which will cook together with the pears, obviously giving a nice strong flavor. And I like, when nutmeg is called for, I like to use whole nutmeg and grate it. Okay. We're going to add a tablespoon of sugar, and I have more sugar if I feel like I need it later to give it nicer flavor. Okay. And I've got a little bit of water just to prime the simmering of the whole mixture. So just a 1/4 cup of water or so. Okay. And we're going to put all that into the pot. I've got a nice heavy duty pot here, and I'm going to go ahead and put that mixture of ingredients. Right into the pot. Put my lid over that and bring it up to a boil and turn it down to a simmer and let it simmer 15-20 minutes. And that should be our sauce. So we'll check it out as we go, see if it's a little chunky in there. If we need to stir it up a little bit to make it nice and tender, taste it as we go to make sure it's just the way we want it, okay? And now we can start to think about our prep for the latkes. and make sure that we have everything ready to go for latkes. And we'll go from there. And you can absolutely have it sort of as a B-roll of what that prep was that led up to that moment. If you can find a clever way to say it. Now, I'm going to finish doing the prep that I've been doing. Cool? Let's take a look at how our apple pear sauce is progressing. Starting to get a little boily in there, and the fruits are starting to fall apart. So we're really getting to what we would consider a nice apple pear thick consistency. You see our cinnamon sticks giving their flavor there. The smells are good. I'm going to turn that down so that it's simmering and let it sort of disintegrate a little bit more. And that should be ready to go. So now we can begin to turn our attention to making the latkes. We don't want to make the latkes too far ahead of time. The sauce should be done and ready so that they're ready to serve with the latkes. So I'm trusting that our sauce is far enough along. You know what would be good to do? Let's taste it. Could be good. All right, it's time to think about making the latkes. Let's take a look at what's going into these, okay? We have onions that need to be finely diced. We have potatoes. I've already peeled two and I'm holding them in cold water. So they will last for a couple of days in cold water. So I've gone ahead and peeled the potatoes. They can help. I've got one more potato to peel. I'd like to show you how I do that. Got a couple of eggs that we're going to use to bind up the mixture. I've got salt, baking powder, okay, not baking soda, but baking powder. And I need some matzah meal, some ground matzah. So what I'm going to do is take some matzah crackers and I'm going to put them through my little food processor here. So what we need here is a little bit of ground matzah cracker. So I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of leaves of matzah into my mini food processor here. And I think we're good. All right, so we have a lot of our latke prep done, but I wanted to show you a few more steps that we need to do to complete it. Before I go grating potatoes, and I know a lot of folks like to grate potatoes in a food processor, I'm against grating potatoes in a food processor because it really accentuates the way they oxidize and it renders a lot of their starch and water into the bottom of the bowl, and we then need to drain that off. I would rather keep that moisture from the potato as part of the ingredient, part of the starch that holds the potato together. So it's much more efficient to use a box grater and grate them in the moment that they're going to go into the mixture. So to that point, let's hold off on grating the potato and mix the mixture that the potato is going to go into first. Make sense? Good. So what I'm going to do there, I'm going to go ahead and crack 2 eggs. And remember, crack your eggs on a flat surface, not on the side of the bowl. That'll help prevent eggshell from going into your mixture. Okay? And I'm going to add to that a heaping 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder. And the difference between baking powder and baking soda baking powder reacts to heat and moisture in order to produce a leavening. Okay, I'm going to add about 1 teaspoon of salt, but I'm going to reserve the right to add a little bit more as we go. I've got a little bit of fresh chopped thyme, and this is maybe a little heretical. It's maybe off the beaten path, but I like just a little bit of chopped thyme in my potato latkes. Okay. And now I need to add my matzah meal, and I've got about a half a cup here. Let's go with half of that first and see how that holds in binding up our mixture. And if I need a little bit more, I'll have that. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and whisk that mixture all together. And now let's think about adding our potato, okay? So I've got one more potato of my 3 to grate. Let's do our onion first. Let's dice our onion. And we want this onion to be very finely diced so that it doesn't have chunks of onion in the finished product. You could potentially grate the onion, but again, you're releasing so much water and juice. When you dice an onion, you allow that to remain in the onion, which is nice. Dicing onions, palm down, fingers up, and we're going to cut a grid work into that onion. I'm cutting from the top of the onion down towards the bottom of the onion. And just before I get to the bottom of the onion, I stop, okay? And now I'm using the tip of my knife and completing the grid. And then grasping the onion in thin slices, increments, I can get my fine diced onion. And that goes not in the matzah, that'll go in my stock. All right, let's finish up with the potatoes. Notice I use a bowl and I peel directly the refuse into that bowl so I'm not cluttering up my workspace. We call that working to the bowl.
Is that a pun or is it what it's actually called?
That's actually what it's called. Take one look at our sauce before we commence. Smelling really good. We're definitely going to turn that off. We've got it cooked enough now that we're going to let it chill and cool off, and then we can kind of grind up those last little bits. Nice. Okay, good. All right, let's get serious about our latkes here. So I have my 3 peeled potatoes. Dry it off. Now, if you're making a lot of latkes, I recommend you still work in small batches so that each batch is nice and fresh. This is a russet or an Idaho potato. Don't grate yourself.
You're doing great.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make one in order to taste it for seasoning and binding, and see if we need to make any corrections before I commit to making the whole batch. Okay, so meet me at the stove. All right, so I've been heating my big skillet here. I want to get it very hot because if it's not hot, the latkes are going to stick to the pan. So we need to have significant heat and significant fat in which to cook. And remember that I'm cooking my sample latke first to make sure seasoning, moisture, binding are all good, okay? So I'm using canola oil here. And I'm getting a good 1/4 inch of a pool of canola oil in the pan. And then one way to portion the mixture out without having to use your hands might be an ice cream scoop, like so. You've got a nice little lacy edges there. And that's the sound we want to hear, that sizzling whisper, knowing that we're frying on contact. If it's not this hot, then you're going to have much more of a risk of your potatoes sticking to the pan. And we want that bottom surface of the latke to take its full color and create a surface, a sear on the bottom of that latke, so that then when we manipulate it with the spatula, it won't stick. And you see how I can pull the fat up a little bit, so give it a little bit more of a deep fry.
What's the difference between fry and deep fry?
The depth of the fat, the amount of fat that you have coming up around the sides of the food. So we would call this pan frying. But look at that nice color, not too dark brown, nice little edges of the potato. So now we're just turning it over to get that same coloration on the other side, as well as to let it cook through. Now, one thing we can do if we're making a lot of latkes and we want to hold them warm to serve when we're ready, and I would not cook your latkes very far in advance of when you're going to serve them. They're really ideal served hot after you've freshly made. So what we can do is put a rack, any kind of a good baking rack, in the oven and just hold them at 200 degrees in the oven. So here's our test latke, and let's give it a go, taste it, and see if we want to commit to making more of this combination. Very good. I like that the potato is the primary binder. The matzah is there in moderation, but it definitely needs a little more salt. Okay. As that mixture has sat, it's developed more of its own texture, really kind of binding it up. It's very nice. All right, let's go ahead and cook some latkes. Put my pan back on heat. Let that heat recuperate. Now remember, we cooked one latke that did not affect the temperature of the pan. Now we're going to be putting multiple latkes in the pan. The temperature of that food is going to bring the temperature of the pan and the oil down. So A, let's make sure we're getting up to the right temperature, and B, add slowly so we don't crowd the pan or add too much cool food to the hot pan all at once. Make sense? So while our latkes are in progress, and I'm not going to walk away for very long, but I am going to chop a little bit of fresh herb as a nice decor or decoration on the plate of the latkes when they're done. I have some parsley. What I'm going to do there is gather that parsley up in a tight little ball and slice in regular increments. Oh, and over here I have also a little bit of sage, which I think goes particularly well with potatoes. This is nice, tender, organic, fresh sage. You could put a little bit of that in your potato mixture as well. But I'm just going to use a little touch of those herbs as garnish on top. Sauce is looking good, cooled down. Alright, as soon as this last batch of latkes is done, I'm going to put them all in the oven to warm and we'll set up our presentation. Alright, we finished cooking our latkes, and in addition to the tasting one that we made, we got 18 latkes out of that batch. So I will be sending the recipe, accompanying the recipe to this video, exactly the proportions of what I put into those latkes. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer these over to our serving tray. I have my sour cream and our pear and apple sauce. And voila, the latkes are done. Sour cream, apple and pear sauce to accompany. I, for one, am making myself a nice plate of latke with the accompaniments. I've had my eye on this latke the whole time. Can I interest anyone in a latke? I had my eye on that one. So, I, for one, Happy Hanukkah, everybody.